What's going on, guys, and welcome to episode 451 of #AskGSM, here today for Wednesday, July 20th, 2022. I am Graham GSM Matthews. Hope you guys are doing well and having a great week so far. If you missed it, my interview with WWE Hall of Famer Goldberg went up on Sunday in video form. Haven't really had a chance to promote it all that much in social media. I've just been incredibly busy over the last week. All my reviews of all the shows that I missed on WrestleRant.com will be up at some point. I promise you. I always catch up, so keep an eye out for those going forward. But yeah, it's been a crazy last 7 days. As I've said before, I will be in attendance for SummerSlam next weekend. And this weekend, I'll be at Ring of Honor's Death Before Dishonor pay-per-view in Lowell, Mass., which I'm really looking forward to. I almost was considering going to Raw next week. I was actually planning on it at one point, but just with Raw being the way that it is, and New York City's just a hell of a journey from where I live in Connecticut. I was there at MSG. I was in Madison Square Garden and just New York in general multiple times last year. I was there for a house show the day after Christmas. I was there for a SmackDown in September. Two great shows, had a lot of fun. But it's been a while since I was last in New York. But it's just such a long way from where I am in Connecticut. It takes a while to get there. It's a fucking a pain in the ass to get home sometimes. So that being said, I'll probably miss out on Raw this week. I know it's the 25 or 20-year anniversary of Rey Mysterio and WWE and whatnot, but I'm more comfortable watching from home for this coming Monday. So, but I will be at Ring of Honor, Death Before Dishonor, and at SummerSlam next weekend in Nashville. Both events I'm very much looking forward to. I'm leaving for SummerSlam on Thursday, so we will still do #AskGSM as scheduled on Wednesday. So keep sending in your questions for next week. But you do got questions for this week as well. You guys already sent in through Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. You can continue to do so by tweeting me on the Twitter machine at WrestleRant with the #AskGSM. Find me on Facebook as well, facebook.com/Graham.GSM.Matthews. Drop a comment on the post I usually put up on Tuesday nights, if not in the wall itself. And last but certainly not least, drop your question down below in the comment section on this very video. I'll include your question in next week's edition. We'll get right into it here for episode 451. Micah does got a couple of questions here. First one being, do you think The Miz or Dolph Ziggler will have one more WWE title reign, or has their booking been so bad that it's just impossible to see them as champ? I always wanted to see Miz as a two-time champ because his first reign I honestly thought was good. The Cena Mania match, unfortunately, was not all that good. That was a very average outing. But the Orton feud was fine. He had a couple of good matches with Jerry Lawler, actually. And that steel cage match he lost it in was also very good at Extreme Rules 2011. I thought he did great work during that run. And then for whatever reason, they just never saw him at that level again. But there's been a lot of people over the last 10 years specifically that got world title reigns for like a substantial period of time. I'm not just talking about like the Jack Swaggers who were champion for fucking 60 days and then it didn't work out and they were never champion again in that company. As far as being a world champion and whatnot. No, I'm talking about like Kofi Kingston, Jinder Mahal, two guys that were WWE champion each for 6 months. And now Jinder, the idea of him being champion again, I mean, even in the first place was laughable, but to go back to that level, yeah, he's in a better spot now than he was before he won the WWE title 5 years ago, but it's laughable. I mean, the guy's been a jobber ever since. Kofi Kingston, laughable as well, just based off how they've booked him. I think Kofi is great. I thought he had a very good run. Jinder's run sucked. I mean, Kofi, there was no reason why they could not have continued to book him as a main event level superstar coming out of that run. Literally within a week, he was back in the tag team division. And honestly, I feel like Big E would have been the same exact thing. They gave him as a nice token run. Oh, he deserved it. And they probably would have never put him back at that level again. And I thought he had a good reign, not a great reign, and that's not his fault. I think he did great work outside of the ring. It was just how they booked him on the shows and constantly losing, and he was never really the focal point of Raw. That's not his fault. I feel like it would have been the same thing because after he got hurt in March, but after he lost the WWE title in January in a 5-way where he was pinned, which was completely unnecessary when you had 3 other guys in the match that could have been pinned, after that, he was back in the tag team scene. He went over to SmackDown. He was teaming with Kofi for a little while. So, same thing. I feel like that would have been another instance where he was champion for a number of months, and they would not have kept him in that main event picture. And maybe he would have gone back at some point. I mean, Miz, again, he did win the WWE title, albeit very briefly. They did not put the WWE title back on The Miz because they saw him as a main event level superstar. The Miz, when he won that title, the timing could not have been worse, I hate to say, but he was booked like a bigger loser than at any point in the last 10 years of his WWE career. I mean, the stuff with Otis and the stuff with God knows who else at that point before he became champion, I don't even remember. It wasn't that he was doing bad work. It was just that they booked him to look more like a loser than at any other point in his WWE career in the last decade. And then at that point, they put the fucking title on him by beating Drew McIntyre with the Money in the Bank cash-in. And then, of course, within 8 days, he dropped the belt right to Bobby Lashley. So you can count that. I mean, unless it's for something like that again, where he's purely a paper champion. I don't think The Miz will be champion again. I was really pitching for that like 5-6 years ago when he was at his peak in 2016, 2017. They didn't do it then. I know they did it last year, but that was purely a matter of circumstance where they didn't want Drew losing to Bobby until they had their WrestleMania match. With Dolph, it's over. I mean, the guy would be lucky if he held another Midcard championship again. I mean, he was IC champion for the last time 4 years ago. And was he not tag team champion recently? He was with Bobby Roode a couple of years ago with Robert Roode. But other than that, I mean, actually, you know what? He was NXT champion. I'll give him that. He was NXT champion earlier this year. Not a main roster title, but he was a champion earlier this year. Dolph always finds his way back to a championship in some form or fashion, whether it's the Raw tag titles, SmackDown tag titles, IC, US, NXT title. That's great. I think his days as a world champion in WWE, for as long as we have one world championship, and even if we had two, are over. I think Dolph's a great worker, and if he can elevate Theory with their upcoming feud, that's great. Dolph has no business being the world champion. Unless he has a late career resurgence, which is always possible. The way he has been booked, as you said, has been so fucking bad, even worse than Miz's. I mean, Miz has at least been on TV. He's been in high-profile programs in the last couple of years. Dolph has been such a fucking loser as far as how he's been booked. It would be comical to see him as world champion again in this company. Maybe elsewhere, maybe you can go on and win the Impact World Championship or the Ring of Honor World Championship or whatever. In WWE, I can safely say that's never going to happen. His second question, what did you think of the Shawn Michaels and Chris Jericho feud from 2008? And what is Shawn and Chris Jericho's best match? It could be with other wrestlers. I loved it. I started watching WWE full time because the funny thing is, and I've said this before, and I was telling someone this recently, that I've talked a lot about how I started watching WWE/pro wrestling in 2008. And I had already been exposed to it in 2007, in like late 2007 during like the Hornswoggle illegitimate son storyline, and when Jericho came back. I was watching a little bit around that point, just because I was already watching USA Network and I was trying to watch more shows on the USA Network, so I gave Raw a shot. I knew friends that were watching wrestling. And then after that, I just kind of fell out of it. I just didn't care. I mean, I saw some good matches. I remember watching the night my family took our Christmas card picture in our living room. I remember taking time away from watching the Raw, not 17th, it was in 2007, that's why I say 17, that's why 7 was on the mind, the 15-year anniversary show of Raw. I remember taking time away from watching the Carlito Jeff Hardy Intercontinental Championship ladder match to go take the picture in the other room. So I watched a couple of those shows, but again, it just didn't really stick with me. But what stuck with me was the Regal stuff, was really the character stuff. And not just any character stuff, but the William Regal character. And then from there, I became a full-time pro wrestling fan. So I really, when I say I have William Regal to thank for that, I 100% mean it. Because it's not like I had never seen wrestling before and I watched it and I fell in love. That's honestly not the case. When I saw Regal stuff, I was like enamored by it. But when I saw other stuff prior to that point, I just didn't really care. So anyway, it was around that point they were doing the Shawn and Jericho feud. I think Jericho actually turned on Shawn and put him through the Jericho 9,000 or whatever, 5,000, on my birthday, because that episode of Raw fell the day after the One Night Stand pay-per-view. Jericho, or rather Michaels, had just lost to Batista in that great stretcher match at One Night Stand. I think they did the Jericho heel turn on that next night's Raw, and if not then the next week. It was around there, but it was an amazing segment. I was hooked as soon as I saw that. And so I was a fan for a majority, if not the entire time, that Jericho and Michaels were feuding. I wasn't paying too close attention to their stuff when I first started watching in April. That was a big part of Raw back then, but I just don't really remember watching live. And I definitely saw what they were doing back in April and May. But it wasn't until June that it really caught my attention, and they did great work with it going into July and August and September, and ultimately in October with that ladder match in No Mercy. So going off of that, what is Shawn and Jericho's best match? You said with other wrestlers potentially too. Their best match together, and probably Jericho's best match ever, is the No Mercy ladder match for the World Heavyweight Championship at No Mercy October of 2008. That's probably Jericho's best match, period, if not the Omega one from Wrestle Kingdom back in 2018. You can go either one. I know Jericho has said that I think he said that the Omega match is his favorite. It might have been outrated by Meltzer. That might be the higher rated one, like that even matters. But I would say Jericho's best match, because of the story alone and how great that match was the No Mercy ladder match from 2008. I would say Shawn's best match, and I'm probably going to sound like a moron if there's another one I'm not thinking of, but it's got to be the Taker one from WrestleMania 25. And that's saying a lot. Shawn has had a lot of amazing matches, including that Jericho match and a lot of the matches they had back in 2008. But I still think the best Shawn Michaels match was the one from, WrestleMania 25 with The Undertaker. So that's what I would say. Going off of that, what did you think of the John Cena versus Batista match at SummerSlam 2008? I loved it. The funny thing is that I didn't watch it live. I was a fan during that period, as I just mentioned, but I was at the beach that day. I remember updating the results of the pay-per-view on my phone, or I was getting... that was back when WWE had a text service, like they could text you what was going on Raw and the pay-per-view, SmackDown, ECW, whatever. So when I wasn't watching the shows, I would get texted by WWE through this mobile service they had back then. This was way before iPhones and stuff, or right around the time iPhones started, but no one really had one, especially my age. But I got texted all the updates, and I was being texted that John Cena lost to Batista, and I was like, oh, that's so cool. It actually wasn't until probably like 5 years later that I actually saw the match for the first time. I found SummerSlam Online or something, 2008, like 5 years later. This was before the network. But after the pay-per-view happened, that I found the match online, and I watched it, and I really enjoyed it, especially because I remember being a fan of the feud, never getting to see the match, and I just always thought it was so cool that they had Batista win clean, and they ended up going back to that like a year and a half later for WrestleMania 26, and it was just a really good big fight feel match. Like, was it a technical wrestling masterpiece? No, but as far as two icons duking it out and you didn't know who was going to win, I thought that was really, really cool, and they captured that vibe perfectly. The crowd was into it. I don't know, I just really, really enjoyed that match. Even looking back on it now, watching it back now, I love that match. So, big fan of Batista and John Cena from SummerSlam 2008. His next question, why do you think John Cena versus The Undertaker at WrestleMania 34 was so short and not a full match like Taker's other opponents in the past? Taker actually explained this on The Last Ride a couple of years ago on that documentary they did on the network. But the whole thing was because they were filming during that whole build-up to that match at WrestleMania 34. He was ready. He felt like he was ready. He trained his fucking ass off for that match. Probably more than any other match in the last, 10 years to Taker train for that match. Because it was coming off that disappointment that was the Roman match at 33. So he really wanted to avenge it. But I don't think Vince thought he was ready. So Vince kept holding off his return. He kept, holding off on it until the Rumble, and then February, and then March. And then they came to a point where it's like, all right, let's just have you return there. And Taker's like, all right, that's fine. Like, I'm ready. I'm physically ready to have a great match. Let's go. Like, it gave him more time to train, I think. And then come showtime, Vince is like, yeah, we're going to have it be a 2-minute match. And maybe Vince did that because, and maybe they explained this and I forget. Maybe Vince's idea or his mindset was, yeah, the match with Roman was so bad, we got to start putting you in shorter matches. And that Cena match is not going to be as good as it was 10 years ago, so let's not even disappoint these people. Let's just do it as is. Let's just do it as a 2-minute squash. People get the match, but not really. And it was a big bummer for Taker because he was ready to go in there and have a full-fledged match. But again, I don't know what Vince's reasoning was behind doing it as a squash. So I was of two minds of it personally. I'm thinking, okay, I don't want a longer match because it was only a 2-minute. Like at the time, I'm thinking Taker probably can't do more than this anyway because people are like, oh, Taker looks so great. It was a fucking 2-minute match. Of course he's going to look great. Knowing what we know now, that Taker was physically ready, maybe he would have gone in there and had a stinker anyway. Who knows? But I feel like with all the matches he's had in recent years where he came back and he had really good matches, in 2018 specifically, like he was involved in that tag team match. I think it was that? No, that was 09. That was 2019 when it was him and Roman against Shane and Drew at that Extreme Rules pay-per-view, which was also a really, really good match. That was right after the Goldberg one, which fucking sucked. So Taker had a lot of high and low matches during that period. But anyway, as far as the Cena-Taker match, that's why. Because I think Vince just wanted to do it as a squash coming off the Taker disappointment at 33. Taker did not want a squash. I don't know what Cena's thoughts on that were. And it worked. I mean, it popped the crowd, but it's like, yeah, I guess we got the match finally at WrestleMania, but it was underwhelming in the respect that had we gotten this match 10 years ago, it would have meant so much more than it did. It would not have been a mid-card, 2-minute attraction, and it really could have felt like something special. I mean, had they not done the match, I would probably be sitting here all these years later thinking, why the fuck would they not have done it? At least we got it, but it wasn't what it should have been. So that was disappointing. Their last question here, since WWE is not going to have a tag team division for the women, should they bring in a mid-card title to enhance the women's division, sort of like the TBS title that AEW has? They can call it the North American Women's Championship. I don't think so. Would that be a better idea than doing a tag team title for the women? Yes, and it's not even the idea that like a women's tag team title is stupid. Like if you do them right, it can work. Like, it's honestly kind of comical, and I brought this up before. The NWA has women's tag team titles, and the NWA barely has really a women's division at all. They have some very good women there, but it's not remotely the size of what WWE has or AEW has. They have women's tag team titles. Why, I don't know, but they did it, and they were booked better in the time that the Hex had it, Allison Kay and Marty Bell, and I'm not a big Marty Bell fan, but as a tag team, they're good. They were booked better as champions than either set of the NXT or the WWE main roster tag team titles. Even Impact has their own Knockouts tag team titles, and they did them 10 years ago. They were a disaster then, and that was back when they had a really stacked women's division. They didn't do it appropriately, and the titles meant nothing, and they deactivated them soon after. But they brought them back last year, and it's not like those championships are the most important thing in that company, but it is cool because Impact actually gives a shit about their women's division, and they have enough women for it to make sense. They have enough teams, and if they don't have enough teams, they make more teams. So they're always constantly defending those titles, making them mean something to a certain degree. The matches are pretty good sometimes. They're not always great. I still prefer the singles women's championship over the tag team one, but they handle it as any other company should. WWE doesn't really do it appropriately, neither does NXT. There's really not that much of a difference between the NXT Tag Team Women's titles and the WWE Women's Tag Team titles. I've said this before, but people thinking, oh, the NXT ones are just so much more prestigious. They're not even defended all that much more often than the WWE Tag Team titles were before those disappeared. I mean, yeah, they were defended recently when Toxic Attraction lost them to Cora Jade and Roxanne Perez. I know they defended them recently, like they won them a few months ago and then lost them recently, but during that first reign they had, when they had them from October through April, they probably had maybe one or two title defenses. They barely defended those fucking titles. And I love Toxic Attraction. I think they're a great group. But those belts have never really meant anything. They meant nothing around Io Shirai and Zoe Stark's waist. They meant nothing when... Who were even the champions? Ember Moon and Shotzi? I mean, they tried, but even when they created those titles, I thought it was a stupid idea. Because they just don't have much of a women's tag team division in NXT. They just don't care about those championships. So the fact that Cora Jade put the belt in the trash last night, I'm thinking, good. Be done with it. Do not bring these back. You can't really come back from this anyway. Why would you put the belt in the trash if you want people to take them seriously going forward? No, just please move on from this and just move on. Anyway, as far as the Women's North American Championship that you mentioned, in WWE, I think that's a stupid idea. In another company, maybe. Even in AEW, I wasn't high on the idea of them having another Women's Championship, not because they don't have the talent, but because, again, they do not book their women's division properly like a real priority. But it's worked out largely because that secondary title, that TBS title, it's not really a secondary title. It's basically the Jade Cargill Championship. I'm very anxious to see how that title will be treated when it's not being held by Jade anymore. I mean, the whole purpose of the title right now is to further Jade's undefeated streak and have her defend against opponents and who can finally beat her. Will that title really mean anything when it's not around Jade Cargill is my question. I hope so. They have a big enough women's division to this point where they can have two competing titles that make sense, that are separate from one another, that the women can vie for and whatever. Because the thing with AEW is they have a lot of women, like WWE does, but they don't have a brand split. So they can kind of exchange women and stuff like that. And beyond Britt Baker, there's not a lot of women that completely dominate TV and other ones that are barely on TV. I mean, you can kind of say that in certain circumstances with certain people. But for the most part, I would say a majority of the women get an equal amount of TV time. With WWE, the unfortunate thing is that if they didn't have a brand split, if they didn't have a brand split, one, they would probably just get rid of the 2 titles and just have one. The problem there, though, is that it would probably be held by Charlotte Flair majority of the time, if not Becky Lynch or Bayley or whoever, the 4 horsewomen. And I love Bianca and I love Rhea, but then no other women would really get a shot of that championship. That's why I like WWE having 2 different women's titles, and you also have Rousey as well, because they have a big enough women's division with enough stars where I think you can justify having 2 top titles. And in that case, the funny thing is that if you didn't have a brand split in WWE and you merged the Raw and SmackDown Women's Championships, only then would I be okay with the mid-card title for those women that I guess Sonya Deville and Raquel Rodriguez and Lacey Evans can vie for, or whoever else is left, I guess. I don't know. The funny thing about that, though, is the fact that if you did that, that's basically what they already have, just without the brand split. We already have a mid-card title in WWE, that women's title. It's called the SmackDown Women's Championship, except they're on even playing field. I honestly don't really get the feeling that the AEW Women's World Title and the TBS title are on the same playing field. Because the TBS title right now is basically just a prop for Jade Cargill to defend against her opponents and extend her undefeated streak. And that's fine, but the championship itself doesn't feel overly prestigious. It's been defended in all these great matches. It's been around for 6 months, and it's only been held by Jade Cargill. It's not main eventing pay-per-views. It's main evented one or a couple of Rampage shows, I guess. Never Dynamite. It's barely defended on pay-per-view. It was defended at Double or Nothing and Revolution, so I will give them that. And it's more of a TV title anyway, I would assume, but I just don't see them being on the same playing field. And I don't like the whole mid-card women's title thing, because then it kind of knocks it down a peg. I mean, again, you can kind of do that, but I don't know. That's why the tag title works, but in theory it does. But in execution, WWE doesn't know how to book a fucking women's tag team division, which we've gone over before, and I just ranted about 5 minutes ago. So, no, I don't really want a secondary women's championship. They don't really have enough women anyway. I mean, the Raw and SmackDown women's divisions, they have talent, but they're not overflowing with talent to the point where it's like, oh, wow, we need another women's title. We really don't. The tag titles meant nothing. They were barely defended. And I feel like the women that you have left, listen, not every feud has to be over a championship. I know what a shocking concept, I know. But not everyone needs a championship to fight for. I mean, yeah, you need titles to fight for and whatever. That's why I think the idea of one world title is stupid, because Roman Reigns isn't even around. In theory, it could work. And not Austin theory, I'm talking about just in theory it could work. But yeah, I just feel like right now it would be a dumb idea to introduce another women's championship they would not take seriously when you already have the Raw and SmackDown women's championships. That's just my take. Joe M. from YouTube, their 2 questions include, despite being involved in a prominent part of the show consistently, do you think some of Seth Rollins' controversial behavior as Universal Champion, from his comments about Moxley to his behavior on Twitter, are part of the reason why WWE have not trusted him to hold a world championship since then? Interesting theory, absolutely not. Rollins, you make it sound like when you say controversial, yeah, it was controversial for the fans. I don't really think anyone else gave a fuck. I mean, maybe Moxley was a little bit bothered by it. I don't get the sense they're not friends. And even when I talked to Rollins for an interview, like a year or 2 after that happened, he said, yeah, we talk all the time. We exchange dad tips and whatever, because they're all fathers now, which is cool. No, I don't think that really had anything to do with it. The stuff that he was talking about in those interviews, promoting the company. The funny thing about what Rollins was saying at that point, the Moxley stuff I thought was really dumb. And the way he was kind of shitting on the fans and Will Ospreay and stuff was a little silly. But when he was talking about, like, oh, WWE is the best company in the world, do I agree with that as far as the product itself? No. But what else do you expect him to say? He was towing the company line. Should he have said that as a babyface? In theory, he should be able to. But at the time, the product was maybe as worse as it is, as bad as it is now, I don't know, but it was still pretty bad back then. So for him to be saying, this was 3 years ago, for him to be saying, oh, this is the greatest company ever, when the product just didn't reflect that on their weekly shows, it wasn't a great reflection of him as champion. And they also didn't really book him correctly. He wasn't very interesting as champion. That's not really his fault. What is his fault is some of the stuff he was saying in those interviews. I don't know if I would say controversial, but controversial for the fans. When you say controversial, it makes me think that he was, some of the stuff he was saying about AEW, whatever, when they were first starting. It's not like he was getting in trouble by the company. I remember when Del Rio was the Impact GFW, whatever the fuck champion, WTF, who gives a shit champion, 5-6 years ago. And he was talking about WWE in every interview, every promo, and how he was slighted by them. I mean, that is a problem. That's the reflection of your company when he's your world champion. That's reflecting back on everyone else. Rollins wasn't really doing that. If anything, he was the exact opposite. He was sucking the company off. He was telling everyone how great they are and how great the wrestling is there and how great of a talent roster they have, half of which is now gone, and all this other stuff. He wasn't really saying anything inaccurate. I mean, you and I may disagree, but that's all subjective, and he was their champion, so what does it really matter? It wasn't like he was in the interviews and stuff like that. He wasn't like he was bringing politics into anything or talking about, oh, I'm a big Trump supporter or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, he wasn't saying anything like that. That the company might be like, no. Like, let's stop bringing politics and religion and shit into this. Like, that would be dumb. So, yeah, he wasn't doing any of that. It was just the fans got on him for some of the shit that he said. In some respects, rightfully so, because he did say some dumb stuff back then. And that was part of the reason why the fans turned on him. And I don't think it's because the company doesn't trust him. I don't think that's the case at all. Rollins has main evented more Raws and more pay-per-views and been in more prominent positions than probably anyone else in the last year aside from Roman Reigns. I mean, look at the year this guy has had. Is he winning a lot? No. But they trusted him to work with Cody Rhodes at WrestleMania, to main event Hell in the Cell, and they had a fucking kick-ass match. They trusted him to be in the ring with Roman Reigns and put on a great match and one of the best matches all year back at the Rumble. They trusted him to be in the Elimination Chamber main event with Brock Lesnar and do the job there and have him lose almost immediately. I mean, that sounds a little dumb because that sounds like a burial, but but still, they've trusted him to main event Raws and really carry the show in the absence of people like Cody and the people like Roman and Brock. When they're not there, Rollins is essentially the focal point. And he's working with all the young guys. He's working with all the old guys. He's working with everyone, and he's having great matches each and every fucking week. They give the guy the mic every week. He's still out there doing interviews. He was a father. He took time off and came back, and he was carrying SmackDown for a long time. They trusted him to work with Edge last year. They had some amazing matches. So I don't think that's at all. I just don't think there's been a time or a place for Rollins to be world champion again. Honestly, if anything, I would think it would be now. I just don't really want to see him be the one to beat Roman Reigns. Because let's put it this way. The last time that Rollins was Universal Champion was 3 years ago. We make it sound like it's been 10, but it's only been 3 years. There are other people that have held world championships that have not held world titles a lot longer than that. But let's go off of because you have to remember too, I'll mention this before I go forward. Before that, before he was Universal Champion, the last time he was a world champion was in 2015. Did they not put the title on him because they didn't trust him because he would get hurt again? Because he got hurt the last reign that he had back in 2005. I mean, he was champion for 2 minutes at Money in the Bank 2016. Let's not really count that because it doesn't really count. Did they not put the championship on him for 4 years, even longer than now, because they didn't trust him because they thought he might get hurt? No, it just didn't really make sense at most points for him to be champion until he won it back in 2019, because that was when he was really, really hot. I mean, he's been very hot as a heel since then, but not to the point where I'm thinking, oh, put the belt on Rollins. It just hasn't been the right time. So back to what I was going to say. He lost the championship in late 2019 to The Fiend. The Fiend held it for a while. The Fiend lost it to Braun Strowman. Rollins went over to Raw anyway, so he would not have even been near that championship. It then became the Roman Reigns title. It's been the Roman Reigns title since 2020. Rollins was never going to beat him for the belt. I don't think he should beat him for the belt. Even at the Royal Rumble when they had that amazing match, I don't think Rollins should be the one to beat Roman Reigns. Roman has got to beat Rollins when they run that back at some point. That leaves the WWE title. Rollins was on SmackDown for about a year, from 2020 to 2021. The WWE title was on Raw. He was not facing Roman Reigns for the Universal Championship, so he couldn't have even gone for it at that point. In early 2020, it was the McIntyre Championship, and he even contended for that championship when McIntyre was champion. Again, they trusted McIntyre to go in there and they trusted Rollins to go in there and put McIntyre over, which he did. They trusted him to go in there and put Owens over, which he did as well. But anyway, he was still kind of finding his footing as a heel, and then he put McIntyre over, and he was on Raw for a little while. He was doing the Rey Mysterio stuff. He's been busy doing other stuff, and then he took time off to go be a father, came back, did the Edge stuff, among other things, did the Cesaro stuff. They trusted him to put him over as well. So it's not like he's had an opportunity to really be a champion, because it's either been the McIntyre title or the Roman Reigns title or the Brock title or now the Roman Reigns title again, I guess. He's done such great work, though, that he should absolutely be champion again within the next year. That is what I will say. I would not have him be the one to take the belt off of Roman. This is why I feel like we should have 2 championships. because he could be the other champion right now. I would have no issue with that. Roman can be the champion over on SmackDown. Rollins can be the face of Raw right now. I mean, if it's not Rollins, then who is it? Cody Rhodes? He's not here. Brock? No thanks. Bobby Lashley? Maybe. But that's about it, though. We don't really have any other great options from Raw. I mean, AJ Styles has been buried 6 feet under. Edge, I'm good with that right now. Balor, give me a break. Rollins could be a world champion right now if they had 2 different titles, but they don't, so that's what that is. Joe's second question, do you see Madcap Moss being built up as a major player in the upper card scene, or is he more likely to go the way of Alex Riley? With Alex Riley, who knows how much farther he would have gone had it not been for the, fabled John Cena burial backstage. Riley has acknowledged it. He hasn't denied it. He's never actually specified what happened. I assume it's something really dumb, and he doesn't want to come out with it because it kind of makes... It's become such a big thing at this point that ultimately, when or even if we find out what happened with Alex Riley, that him and John Cena, that it's going to be disappointing. It's going to be like, oh, we didn't hold the door for him, so that's why John Cena wanted him buried. I mean, at that point, would we even believe something like that? Maybe there's more to it than I'm letting on. I have no idea. But I don't honestly know how much farther Alex Riley would have gone. He wasn't like a great worker, but he was good enough, and he was over in 2011 that they could have... I don't think Alex Riley would have been a world champion. I don't. I think that, yeah, he beat The Miz. I think the highest, had Riley not been buried, the highest he would have gone was like the mid-card, maybe upper mid-card. That's what you said, the upper mid-card scene. But I don't even really see him going that far. I think he just would have been a United States champion, and that would have been it. But anyway, as far as Madcap Moss goes, I'm still not entirely sold. They got to change the guy's name. Thankfully, they ditched all the dumb character stuff and the gimmick shit. That was long overdue. I've just honestly never been the biggest Riddick Moss fan. Even going back to NXT, I always thought he was physically impressive, but he never really stood out to me beyond his physique. I liked his tag team with Tino Sabatelli. I honestly thought Tino was more of a star than Madcap Moss was. Moss just felt generic, and he's been getting good reactions lately, but he just feels like a creative wrestler. We don't really know much about him beyond the fact that he was with Baron Corbin. Even when they brought him up with Mojo Rawley and he was doing the 24/7 title stuff, he bored me to fucking tears. And then he got hurt and he was gone for like a year and a half. So anyway, with Moss, I still don't really see what the company sees in him. I'm not going to complain because it's nice that they're at least attempting to push a fresh face. And he's not bad. I just think he's generic and he's not really at the level that other people deserve to be at. The push that he's getting right now, I can name probably 5 other people that should be in that position. But it is what it is. Or people that aren't even there anymore that should be in that position. People like Keith Lee or Karrion Kross or God knows who else. But anyway, I think he'll do fine. Do I think he'll become an upper mid-carder in that company? I don't. Maybe my mind will change. Maybe he will find a lot of luck and he'll become a main event player on SmackDown. I just don't see it. I think people are cheering him right now because he's kind of coming off the Corbin thing. Beyond that, once that kind of dies down a little bit more, I don't really see people giving a fuck about him because it's not like he's had a lot of great matches or these great promos. He's just kind of, I don't know. I just find him to be an all-around average player. He could be worse for sure, but there is not one thing aside from maybe his physique that really stands out as being great. He's not a great worker. He's not a great talker. He's not a great character. Doesn't really have a story. He spent his entire life in developmental. Okay, cool. So I don't know. I don't really see the hype around Madcap Moss personally. I'm probably in the minority there. It's nice they're attempting to push him. And I honestly, but the good thing with the push that he's getting, at least they're trying. They're trying. If it doesn't work, then great. There's a lot of people, they don't even fucking try. So I will give them that, is that at least they're at least trying with Madcap Moss. They're putting him on TV. They're giving him big wins. He's in a prominent position most weeks on SmackDown. That's great. If it doesn't work and people don't care, then you pull the plug on the push. And ultimately, I think they will. But at least they're trying with him. There's a lot of people that don't even try. They don't even get called up, and they let them go. So at least with Madcap, they're trying, and I appreciate that. No L from Facebook, their first question was, do you think Cora Jade's heel turn was pointless in NXT? The Cora Jade heel turn. So let me answer John Ritland's question as well. He also asked about this. I think at least I got multiple questions about this. He also asked, is the Cora Jade heel turn one of the dumbest decisions by WWE lately? It'd be one thing if she wasn't half of the one tag team champions, but now it's just beyond stupid in hindsight. So here's the thing with the heel turn. Cora Jade turning heel, I was never really high on that idea because I just think she's a natural babyface. But from a storyline standpoint, forgetting the tag team title stuff for a second, it does make sense. The logic that she gave last night and that she helped bring Roxy into the company, or Roxanne or whatever. She brought Roxanne Perez into the company. She became the new girl next door type character on the show. Cora Jade got jealous. Roxanne Perez won the breakout tournament. Cora Jade won War Games, and what did she get out of it? A couple title shots that she lost? She lost, and she lost. And also the fans were turning on Cora Jade months ago. She didn't really get a great reaction at the Stand and Deliver show that I was at in Texas and in Dallas over Mania weekend. She got an all-right reaction, but not nearly as loud as I thought she would. People in NXT, for whatever reason, that crowd just does not really take to her. They just do not care about Cora Jade. So honestly, the heel turn doesn't bother me all that much because I figured it was coming. The problem with the heel turn was how it was executed. Not what, but how. The fact they rushed it as quickly as they did. They literally won the tag team titles 2 weeks ago. A week before Cora turned on Roxanne Perez. That's pretty stupid. So they completely rushed the story. They've been friends in storyline for a month or two, which is nothing. It was just way too rushed. I mean, if they had dragged it out a little bit more and waited until they won the tag team title or lost the tag team title, why even put the fucking tag team titles on them? And after what I said earlier about the women's tag team division, thinking about it now, I'm not even kidding. I think there's part of the reason why they probably won the tag team titles, not only to make the heel turn more shocking, but honestly, I think they did that so they could do what they did last night. Because they needed to find a way to trash the tag team titles. Now listen, if they come back next week and say, oh, there's going to be a tournament to determine new NXT Women's Tag Team Champions, then it's like, okay, that was really fucking dumb. And I think that's what they're going to do. And I don't even want to give them the credit here, but I think there's also better ways to do that than what they did. But I think maybe that they did what they did because they want to get out of the tag team title thing and like get rid of them altogether. And the only way they could do that was by having Cora Jade drop it in the trash, which I think is pretty fucking dumb. But listen, the titles mean as much as trash anyway. It's a fitting resting place, as other people have said, for those titles, so I can't really disagree. I think there's more respectful ways to trash the title, but that's the thing. I don't even know if they are. There has been no word on if they're completely getting rid of the championships. Maybe they will. I hope they do. I don't think they will, though. I think they're going to keep them around. So to do what they had her do on Tuesday was really fucking dumb. Why even put the belts on? So her logic for what she said last night made sense up until the tag team title thing. Because if she resented her this whole time, I guess she was happy with winning the tag team titles with her, but then she was mad that Roxanne got cocky and wanted to go for the main women's title too. And she was like, oh, I thought you cared about these tag team titles. I mean, apparently you don't because you just dropped it in the trash. I mean, she's a heel. She's supposed to contradict herself, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, I thought the promo was fine. The heel turn I thought was just really, I mean, if they weren't tag team champions, it wouldn't be that dumb, but the fact they are champions and they couldn't wait another month to do this is really, really dumb. It's really stupid. So, if this is the death of the tag team titles, it might actually be a blessing in disguise, but the way they executed that whole thing last night and last week, as I've said elsewhere, was really stupid. Let's see here. Next question, also from Noel from Facebook. Top 5 Rey Mysterio matches in WWE. Honestly, coming up with the list, despite spending, I say 20, but he took time off here and there. Despite spending 20 years in WWE, celebrating the 20-year anniversary of his debut on Monday, this coming Monday, there's not a lot of matches that immediately come to mind. I honestly had to look a couple up. I mean, there's matches that I saw on the list and I'm like, oh, okay, that makes sense. I would put that in the top 5 Rey Mysterio WWE matches as well. But there's just not as many as you think there would be. For Rey Mysterio being one of the best of all time, one of the greatest ever, he probably should have more career matches in WWE. The problem is that a lot of his best matches ever came in WCW, and then when he came to WWE, he just got hurt so much. And then he left for it wasn't really that long though. He left in 2015. His last match, I think it was in 2014. Then he got released in 2015. He came back in 2018. So he was gone for about 4 or 5 years. So he spent about 15 years, full-time in WWE. But a lot of those times, he was gone for like a year plus with injuries. So every time he really got going momentum-wise, he would get hurt. And it was always his knees for the most part. Or he tore a tricep or whatever. His best matches, in no particular order that really come to mind for me, any of the Jericho matches from 2009, specifically the match from the Bash, was probably his best match in WWE ever. The Bash in 2009 for the Intercontinental Championship title versus Mask, amazing match. Probably the second best match of that year behind Shawn and Taker at WrestleMania 25. Any of the CM Punk matches, the two that come to mind, the Over the Limit one, I think people would regard as the best because that was a culmination of their feud. I think it was the hair versus mask match at Over the Limit 2010. The one that I really resonate with, though, was the Capital Punishment match. There really wasn't much of a feud behind it. They just had a random match at that dumb Capital Punishment pay-per-view back in 2011. But that match was really, really good. So I love either of those matches. Obviously, the tag team match from No Mercy 02, him and Edge versus Benoit and Angle to determine the first ever WWE SmackDown Tag Team Champions. Amazing match. Eddie Guerrero, any of those, you can't include the WCW ones because we're talking WWE, but the SummerSlam match, the ladder match for the custody of Dominic, kind of a dumb storyline at certain points, but it's iconic for, a lot of different reasons, and the matches were great. So probably the SummerSlam match. And then also from 02, the Kurt Angle match, his debut on pay-per-view at SummerSlam 02, one of the best openers in pay-per-view history, him and Angle. So as an honorable mention, I would mention the John Cena one from, that random Raw, almost exactly 11 years ago from this coming Monday, when he won the WWE title that night from The Miz, and then he immediately lost it later that night to John Cena. The match was great, though, and I don't know if they ever had a rematch after that. They didn't have many matches in WWE, maybe one or two. But that match was fantastic, though. I really, really enjoyed that match. So those are some of my top 5 best Rey Mysterio matches of all time. Probably more I'm not thinking of, but those were the ones that really came to mind. You had a couple good ones with Taker, 2 on SmackDown, and at the Rumble in 2010. That was a good one. Even since he's been back, I really like the Brock one from Survivor Series. I thought that was a really good match. Some of the Rollins matches were pretty good. I'm trying to think of other really good matches he's had since he's been back, especially lately, in like the last year or so. There's probably more. Oh, the Roman match inside Hell in the Cell was a TV match, but that was also quite good as well. So those are some of the ones that come to mind. At Reborn Again, John Ritland, I mentioned him earlier. Check him out on YouTube, Real Honesty with John Ritland. His first question was, so that 6-man tag team quote-unquote match on Raw, what was that about? Also, given how quite a few of these women have been treated lately, maybe Sasha Banks and Naomi were right to walk out. That match was an embarrassment. That whole 24/7 title bullshit was just, I shit on it all the time. It's almost hard to even care at this point, but that was one of the worst things I've seen on Raw in a while. The fact that Asuka and Alexa Bliss were even involved in that bullshit makes it even worse. That was honestly probably what bothered me more than anything, was that Alexa fucking Bliss was involved in one of those, let me win the title then quickly lose it shit. I mean, that is just the bottom of the barrel as far as booking goes. That is bad. Lame creative at its finest, if you can even call it creative. Were Sasha and Naomi right to walk out? Yeah, the tag team titles were a joke. I mean, the whole thing was that the company didn't treat them properly, and WWE then responds with them walking out by trashing the titles, which I'm not even complaining that they shouldn't have done that because the titles meant nothing. But they should have meant something from the get-go, and that's a whole other bag of worms as far as Sasha and Naomi go. I would never implore to walk out for the most part. I still don't think they should have walked out. I think they, especially the night of the show, I think that was a little stupid. I still maintain that. But if Sasha's actually leaving and it's not like, I'm walking out only to come back, then fine. I mean, if she really wants out and she's not coming back, then that makes sense. Naomi, we still don't know what her status is. It sounds like she might not be back either, which, I mean, if she didn't want to leave the company entirely, then she probably shouldn't have walked out with Sasha, but we'll see what her future holds, I'm sure, very soon. One of his other questions here, so with Ric Flair's last match set, what do you think we can expect from it? Obviously, there's a train wreck aspect that'll intrigue people, but this likely has disaster written all over it. Yeah, so for those that missed it, it's going to be Rick and Andrade El Idolo taking on Jeff Jarrett and Jay Lethal in tag team action in Rick's final match at StarCast next weekend. The weekend is SummerSlam in Nashville. So that is random as fuck, but I know he and Jeff have history from WCW, I guess from TNA too. Andrade is his son-in-law, right? I guess that is the right term for it. So Andrade, he's related to. And then Jay Lethal, he has history with also from TNA back in 2010. And I guess they're closer with that, whatever. So putting Ric Flair in a tag team match is probably for the better, because a singles match even would be way worse than a tag team match. So, I mean, his like final match being a tag team match on paper is underwhelming. His last match, period, should have been Shawn Michaels, WrestleMania 24, but whatever. But if we're not talking about that, so tag team matches is fine. A tag team match is fine just because he's so fucking old and he has no business being in the ring anyway, and that will very much limit him, so that's good. Do I care about the match? I mean, I guess that I'm morbidly curious to see how bad this thing is. I don't really have much of a desire to see Jeff Jarrett. I like Jeff Jarrett, but to see him in the ring at this point, I don't really have much of a desire to see that either. Hopefully a majority of the match is just Andrade versus Jay Lethal. That's really what I hope this match is, and then Ric Flair just tags in to do the figure 4 on Jay, and they have a woo-off maybe, and then Jeff Jarrett attempts to hit someone with a guitar. Hopefully that's the extent of it. I'm sure it will be much more than that, unfortunately. But yeah, this has had disaster written all over it since they first announced the whole event thing from the get-go. And honestly, I'll say this too. I had no desire to give these people my money. I can't even go to the show because I'm flying out of Nashville on Sunday. And the show is on Sunday. I thought it was Friday or Saturday or whatever, but it's not. It's on Sunday night. I had no desire to give these people my money. I'm not supporting this bullshit. But then I looked at the card. And the card looks phenomenal. Like they were doing, I think Jacob Fatu and Josh Alexander, I think. David Hart Smith and Killer Cross. The Briscoes versus the Von Erichs. The American Wolves versus Motor Shitty. That's stupid. If they were a bad tag team, that would be a great name for them, but they're amazing. Motor City Machine Guns. Them against American Wolves, as I mentioned. So the undercard looks great. Jordan Grace versus Deonna Purrazzo and Rachel Ellering for the Knockouts title. It's just the main event that sounds like an absolute disgrace. So that's one thing I'm not looking forward to. But I'll probably watch the show because the rest of it sounds amazing. So we'll see how it plays out, pal. At Iwagu91, their first question was, it's Wednesday, you know what that means. Do you think Hangman Adam Page was going to feud with Brody Lee before the latter's death? I do, and I think that might have been confirmed somewhere. I don't know if Tony Khan confirmed that or if it was someone else. Maybe it was Paige. It might have been Brody's wife. I don't know. But they were definitely building to Brody Lee versus... They were totally building to Brody Lee versus Adam Page when Brody came back. That's why they were having Adam Page interact with the Dark Order in Brody's absence, because they were probably building to that match at some point in 2021. We didn't get it, unfortunately. That's a shame. So, yeah, that's probably the direction they were going in before Brody's passing. What is your favorite WWE and AEW match of last year? I had to go back and look at my year in review awards to kind of refresh my memory what the best matches of last year were, because I've seen so many matches it's hard to remember sometimes. My favorite WWE match, the runner-up would probably be Edge, Roman, and Bryan from Mania, just because I was there. The other best match would probably be Walter and Ilya Dragunov from TakeOver 36. That whole show was the end of an era, because NXT became NXT 2.0 like right after that. But that match was incredible. That was such a great match. And I had waited so long for it, and it wasn't even in a big arena. It was, it was in the fucking Performance Center, but they still had a great match, though. So probably that one. And then for AEW, the runner-up for me, a lot of people are going to say Bryan Danielson and Kenny Omega, and that I could see that being their match of the year. For me, it was probably Young Bucks and Lucha Bros, the tag team steel cage match, one of the best tag team matches I've ever seen. And the reason, well, you said favorite, and I say that's my favorite because I was there for that one at All Out in Chicago. So that would probably be my favorite AEW match of last year, and then Walter and Ilya Dragunov from TakeOver 36. But there were a lot of great matches last year, so I had a lot of tough competition to pick from there. His next question, your thoughts on Dolph Ziggler entering a feud with Theory. I wasn't too high on it initially because I'm like, who gives a fuck about Dolph Ziggler in 2022? But you know what? I say that, and every time he comes out, he gets a great reaction. People like Dolph Ziggler. He did in NXT, and he did when he came back on Raw. I mean, I say came back, but he was only gone from Raw for like 2 weeks. They pretended like he was gone for like 6 months. Oh, we haven't seen him since 2019. Like, he was here 2 weeks ago in a fucking Battle Royal that he was there until the end for. But anyway, thinking more about it last week... Listen, if he's there to put Theory over and he explains, listen, I was once in your spot, I won the Money in the Bank briefcase 10 years ago, and these people turned on me, and, whatever. I mean, he'll be the babyface in this feud, so probably not say that exactly. But that makes sense. And if they were having matches on the house show anyway, on the house show circuit or whatever anyway, and they can have great matches, and ultimately Theory goes over, then I see no issue with it. I really don't. If Ziggler is beating Theory once or twice, that is pretty stupid. I mean, Ziggler has credibility, but it's impossible to take him seriously at this point. Theory's got to win. And it gives Theory just another new enemy to focus on. He's already feuding with Lashley and Brock and Roman and all these other people. I think the fact that he's got beef now with Ziggler is pretty interesting. It's an interesting use of Ziggler. I feel like Robert Roode is fucked. I feel like we'll come to find out that he's going to be let go from his contract soon. I wouldn't be shocked. I hate to say it. I mean, he did debut on the main roster in 2017. And usually when that happens, you sign a new contract. So it's possible that he signed a 5-year deal at that point. His deal's coming up, and he might be either leaving or he might be being let go in August. But I hope that's not the case. Anyway, the feud's fine. If it's a way to get Theory over and they can have some good matches, then more power to them. At @R_Garcia_sports, Raphael's question here. Thanks for the question. Your question was, what's Tiffany Stratton's ceiling? That's an interesting one because if you asked me 6 months ago, I would say no ceiling. She's not good and the gimmick sucks. So the thing is, though, in the last 6 months, I'll give her credit. There's a lot of NXT 2.0 people that haven't gotten a lot better. She actually has improved a lot. She really has. Like, some of the matches she's had lately are far better than what she was doing when she first debuted on TV. She debuted on TV way too quickly, yes, but she's gotten a lot better in the ring, and the character still isn't great, but she's not doing the character stuff as much. She's not like, oh, daddy, give me his credit card and all this other dumb shit. They haven't really focused on that too much, so if they can tone down that, really emphasize her in-ring ability, I mean, I don't know if this is a great comparison, but it reminds me a lot of Bianca Belair. Bianca never had a bad gimmick. Bianca was far better in the ring when she started in NXT than Tiffany Stratton currently is. But that's because Bianca was in the company for a lot longer before she debuted on TV in 2017. She was there for like a year and a half before she finally debuted on television a year and a half later as part of the Mae Young Classic. But with Tiffany Stratton, it kind of gives me those same vibes, though. Like, she's very athletic. She can do some cool stuff in the ring, like Bianca even could early on. And the potential is there. I'm not saying she's going to be headlining WrestleMania like Bianca Belair. Maybe she will. Who knows? But she gives me Bianca vibes in that she's very impressive for still being very early on in her career. And she doesn't come from a wrestling background. Bianca didn't either. She came from a bodybuilding background. I think Tiffany Stratton does as well. And with what we've seen of her so far as her athleticism goes, she's very impressive. So if she can continue to hone in on those skills and get better, she could be a real star in that division and beyond. Again, the character stuff is stupid. I wish they would kind of go in a different direction with that or tone it down even a little bit more than they already have. But honestly, I feel, I would never have said this a couple of months ago, but I do think Stratton has a very high ceiling for success if she, with an asterisk here, as long as she continues on the right path to having that success by improving and so on and so forth. At Boss Antelope 86, do you think the product will change if WWE goes back to TV-14? At noob_n_co1991 also asked the same thing. Do you think WWE will go back to TV-14? If so, how will the current culture handle WWE on TV-14? So I'll probably make this the big headline of this video. I tweeted this last week when I saw the news. I was actually, fun fact, when I saw the news break on my timeline last week, and credit to Andrew Zarian of Metman Podcast, he breaks a lot of credible stories. He was the first one to break the story. The tweet had so many responses when he first said, they're going TV-14 potentially as early as this past Monday, which they didn't, but I'll get to that in a second. So many replies and quote tweets and likes and people freaking out. Oh, happy day, the PG era is over. I hate to break it to you, but again, when I saw that tweet break, I was already recording WrestleRant Radio with RJ at that point. I could have very easily stopped what I was talking about on the show with RJ and brought that up, because we do incorporate breaking news sometimes if something breaks while we're talking. I didn't do that because I knew it wasn't a big story. It's a big story in the sense that, to answer Noob's question, according to Zarian, they are going TV-14. That's all but confirmed. It's just not yet. He didn't jump the gun. He just was reporting what he was being told. They don't know when they're doing it, but they are going back to TV-14, at least for Raw. I think SmackDown might be a different story, or NXT. Maybe NXT too, who knows. Here's the thing, though. I tweeted this last week. Is it cool that they're going back to TV-14? Yes. Will it change anything? Absolutely fucking not. And anyone expecting that it is going to change anything is going to be in a world of disappointment. Is going to be in for a world of disappointment when that happens in a couple of weeks, months, whenever the change happens. Will it give them more of an opportunity to do TV-14-esque stuff? Yeah, Dynamite is a TV-14 show. But people are not going to want to hear this. You can have a great PG show. The rating doesn't even really matter. If it was a G-rated show, that would matter. Because Saturday Morning Slam was G-rated on purpose. And they couldn't even... The ironic thing was that it was called Saturday Morning Slam, but you couldn't really do wrestling moves, so a lot of it was just comedy bullshit because it was a kid show, and you can't show violence in any way. A PG rating is not going to hinder the product. The company was PG even well before the Attitude Era, and they had a lot of great storylines and matches back then too. It's a different time, I get it. The thing is, though, the Attitude Era ain't ever coming back. It's not. And even with the rating, they were TV-14 even well after the Attitude Era was over. And there was a lot of shit programming back in the 2000s as well. There's shit programming now, but there was also shit programming back then. You're probably saying to yourself, oh, I'll take the shit programming from 2004, 2005 over what we get now. Correct. But it's a different time in the world, and a lot of the dumb shit they were doing back then on TV, the Katie Vick crap and bras and panties, specifically with what they were doing with the women, honestly, more than anything, was what made that show TV-14. All the blood, all the swearing. The swearing I don't really mind. They got to cut it back a little bit if they were to do that. I mean, I think even now they can cut back on the swearing on the shows, and it's already PG. Case in point, last night on NXT, Cora Jade, for the millionth fucking time, she's probably the million and first woman, and that's not even a word, but she's like the millionth person on NXT or the main roster or whoever in WWE to call their opponent a bitch. How often do they use the word bitch? I mean, I swear all the time on this thing. I'm one to talk, right? Because I swear all the time, and I probably swear a little too much. I definitely acknowledge that. And I could probably tone back as much as WWE can. But with the women specifically, it's their go-to. It's like they're fidgeting and they can't help themselves unless they use the word bitch in their promos. And I will bet you anything that's not because of the women writing their own promos. They script everything on these shows. Raw, SmackDown, NXT, for the most part. They're always using the word bitch. Shit they don't use as much, but when they do, they bleep it. And there's been times where they've said shit and they don't bleep it. And it's been a PG show. I always go back to, as far as what the turning point was, I always say it was when The Rock came back in 2011. That was the first, because I'm a great sample size for this, because I started watching when the PG era started in 2008. So I really know nothing but the PG era. So you might be saying, oh, so you're biased and whatever. Yeah, but I've also watched TV-14 wrestling, and it's just, not that it's bad, but it doesn't make that much of a difference. If Dynamite was PG, they would have to get rid of a lot of the dumb blood stuff that they do. But I guarantee you it would still be a great show. Again, another case in point, NXT. NXT before the NXT 2.0 bullshit, which, by the way, is definitely not a PG show, with all the focus on women's bodies and the way they treat women and what they say about these women and how they portray them and whatever, is certainly not TV-14. I'll tell you that right fucking now. But prior to that point, we had NXT itself. The classic gold and yellow brand, or the classic black and gold brand, whatever. Great show. And it didn't need a TV-14 rating. But when Rock came back in 2011, I remember specifically that night. Prior to that point, John Cena was making poopy jokes, and it was like, yeah, that was fucking, like, the absolute worst of the PG rating was when they first went PG, from like 08 to 2011, like early 2011, because they were saying poopy jokes, and you couldn't even say ass. But when Rock came back in 2011, he said ass or asshole or whatever. He said a lot of different swears in that promo when he first came back. And I'm thinking, holy, it was so refreshing because I'm like, wow, no one can get away with saying that nowadays. No one says ass. And then from there, it kind of became a regular thing and they really haven't looked back. The word bitch for them is really nothing new. I hear that and I'm like, okay, cool. I feel like AEW, I've said this before, like when they first had Inner Circle, they were flipping everyone off, like, oh, fuck this, fuck that. Like, oh, we're so cool. It's not really that cool. You could use like shit and stuff like that in a meaningful way, and it means something on these shows, but they just don't. And I mean, with AEW, I mean, they do. I mean, they don't. The TV rating isn't hurting their show, but there's a lot of times where AEW like overdoes the swearing and stuff like that, and it's not really. I'm like, okay, cool. Like even the blood and shit. Like if it wasn't TV-14, we probably wouldn't get Anarchy in the Arena and all this other shit. Good. I'm not a fan of that stuff anyway. Maybe you are, but I'm not. I don't want to see that shit in WWE. I'm not even saying WWE is better than AEW for that, but I don't want to see that garbage. I think it's fucking dumb. If you do it once in a while, cool. But Impact does it too. I feel like they do too many of these hardcore bullshit matches. Yeah, it's better than the standard missionary of stipulations, that being the fucking no-holds-barred match for WWE. I feel like we see that all the time. Steel cage, too. There is a middle ground, though, to where you don't have to do barbed wire everywhere and then just do a standard no DQ match. There's ways that you can make it special. Like, blood and guts once in a while, I think is great. Like, once a year, perfect. But it doesn't really mean anything when we get Anarchy in the Arena the month before. But that's about AEW. We're talking about WWE here. The bottom line is, it is not going to change shit. It's going to happen. It's inevitable. I think that's cool. It's cool that TV-14 is coming back. I really do. It might give them more opportunities to do more cool stuff. The problem is this, and I said this in the tweet, and I apologize that it took me 5 or so minutes to get to this point. Nothing will change as long as the same man is in charge of creative, that being Vincent Kennedy McMahon. And even if he's gone, dead, arrested, or whatever, it's, for now anyway, I would assume still be Bruce Pritchard and all those sort of people still writing the shows. Even if you cut the head off the snake, you still got the rest of the body for a little while until that dies out. Until there's a complete overhaul of creative, the shows will not change. It could be G, PG, TV-14, and Rated R. It's not going to matter. The show will still be as bad as it is right now. Raw, SmackDown, you name it. It will not change. So don't get your hopes up. I think it's cool the ratings coming back. And as other people have said, I think I heard Solomonster say this, the biggest change you can honestly make that would make a difference to me is making Raw go back to 2 hours. And even then, as he acknowledged, that's not going to make Raw a better show automatically. Because there's been a lot of bad 2-hour Raws in years past, before 2012, as there was 3-hour Raws. So no one thing is going to automatically change the company. It could help, but as long as the creative is the same, nothing is going to change. I cannot stress that enough. At noob_n_co 1991's question, what are your thoughts on Jeff Jarrett not only being Ric Flair's final opponent, but also the guest ref at SummerSlam? I believe that Jarrett, as guest ref, might be long-term storytelling after the last time he was a guest ref in a title match. I don't know if you're talking about the NWA show from a couple of months ago. They don't give a fuck about that. I'm sure no one even remembers that because no one really watches NWA aside from me and you, I'm sure. If you're not talking about that, I don't remember when else he was a ref in WWE. Maybe he was a ref at SummerSlam like 30 years ago. That has not been acknowledged. I've seen no one say that. I have no idea what you're talking about. As far as Jarrett being the special guest ref, I think it's cool. Could they have found a bigger name? I guess, but they're in Nashville, so makes sense, I guess. From a storyline standpoint, it makes more sense than, I mentioned Rikishi or someone, but even that would make sense because you can't have someone that's on the Usos side or even the Prophet side. It's got to be like an unbiased ref. Solo Sikoa would not have made sense, Sami Zayn, because they would have been on the Uso, the Bloodline side. That would have been dumb. Maybe Jarrett will turn on, maybe we'll find out that the Usos paid off Jarrett and he'll turn on the Prophets anyway with a guitar shot. Who knows? But from a storyline standpoint right now, it makes sense that someone not involved with either team would be doing it, and that being Jeff Jarrett. So I'm fine with it. I actually like Jeff, and him coming back to do it. Cool. It doesn't really make that much of a difference, but it's not someone that we see on the show every month. It's not one of those legends they trot out all the time. It's we don't see Jarrett on TV constantly, so it's honestly a little refreshing, which I think is pretty cool. At E13A, we'll end with our final 4 questions here. From Twitter, I've seen people say that Thor, Love, and Thunder got overindulgent with the comedy. Is this true? In a nutshell, yes, it is. We actually just recorded an episode of the Next Panel podcast, myself, Chris, and Phil, reviewing Thor, Love, and Thunder. That should be up on Friday, so keep an eye out for that. But we talk a lot about the overindulgence of comedy and what worked about the film, what didn't work about it, if we enjoyed it, was, because there was a lot of people that did not like that movie and called it one of the worst MCU movies of all time. To say that is pretty fucking foolish, I would say. It's not one of the best ever, but I enjoyed it. It's probably somewhere in the middle. Not everything is the best ever, the worst ever, by the way. But yes, it was a little too overindulgent with the comedy, and we talk a lot more about that cheap plug on the Next Panel podcast this Friday here on the channel. He also asked, will Cora Jade be successful as a heel? Kind of going off what I said earlier. I think she can be. I still think she's a natural babyface, but I thought she did well at the promo last night. She's definitely improved her promo game from what it was months ago, like when she first showed up in NXT. And that's what you want to see. What's the point of NXT if you're not improving? So she's gotten better. She may not be a great heel. She might be one of those pesky heels that no one can take seriously, and she's a loser. But no, I think she's good enough to make it work. So we'll see what she has in store for that character. I think it'd be good if she ditched the skateboard shit, and it sounds like she might. When she came out with a promo, she was dressed in all black and whatever, which ironically I think was her name before she became Cora Jade. It was like Elena Black or something. So yeah, it's interesting. Definitely check out her promo from NXT, if you didn't see it. I think she is good enough to make it work, but she's got to ditch like the backwards hat and the punk rock gear. She's going to need new gear. She's going to need new music. I guess everyone, when they turn heel, becomes like this, especially with the women. Like, they become this dark character. But she's going to have to do something different in order for it to work, in my opinion. Thoughts on Keith Lee and Swerve Strickland? I love them. I think they're great. I went on a much bigger rant about this on WrestleRant Radio last week. Them winning the titles isn't really the issue. I just think that they could, with the division, I don't know what their plan is, that they even have a plan. FTR is the best tag team in that company. Why wouldn't they be champions, is my thing. I guess you don't want to rush their title chase. I get it, but at this point, I don't think they're going to beat Lee and Swerve for the belts. I don't think Lee and Swerve are going to lose it right back to the Bucks. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So, I don't know. I think they're great. I would rather see them on their own. I don't really care about the whole tag team thing because we know they're going to break up anyway. AEW is enough tag teams in that division to hold those titles that you don't really need Lee and Swerve in the role of champions. So, that's my thing. Not really high on the idea of them as champions. I think they could be doing a lot more than that. It's something, at least they're on the show, so I will give them that. And they have a great chemistry. But I would rather see those belts back around the Bucks or FTR or someone like that, or an actual team, or maybe another team that hasn't held the belts yet, because we know Lee and Swerve are not long for that division. Speaking of which, his last question for the episode, do you like long title reigns? I do. I honestly feel like, and I've said this before here on the show, though, I feel like we've gotten a lot, like too many of them in recent years. Like, way too many of them. Not just in WWE, but across all the companies. I feel like in every company there's been a champion that has held a title for a year. I could probably name 10 people that have held titles for at least 1 year in the last couple of years. Nick Aldis was champion for 3 years in the NWA. Who was it in Impact? Taya Valkyrie was the Knockouts Women's Champion a few years ago for over a year. Deonna Purrazzo was champion on and off. I mean, 2 different reigns, but she was champion on and off for almost 10 months to a year. And I didn't mind that, but again, it starts to add up a little bit. The North, Josh Alexander and Ethan Page were Impact World Tag Team Champions for over a year. Let's see here. In AEW, Kenny Omega was the AEW World Champion for almost exactly 1 year. Britt Baker was the Women's Champion for almost a year. Sheeta was champion for over 365 days. So there. I'm trying to think what else in AEW. I mean, those are the ones from AEW that stand out. In WWE, I mean, Becky Lynch was the Raw Women's Champion for over a year. Shayna Baszler was NXT Women's Champion for over a year. Asuka, a number of years ago, was the NXT Women's Champion for over a year. And that was special because no one had really done it at that point, but now everyone does it. Walter, champion for over 2.5 years. Ilya Dragunov has been champion for almost 1 year in NXT UK. Gallus were tag team champions for over a year. Kaylee Ray was the women's champion for about 2 years. I know, COVID had a lot to do with that, but still. On the main roster, I already mentioned Shayna and Becky. Who else from the main roster? Roman obviously has been a champion for almost like 2 years. Almost 2 years now as of August. Let's see. Not the US and the IC titles aren't really held for that long. Nakamura's had like 6-month reigns, but not close to a year. For the women's titles, I mean, there's been a lot of them. I mentioned just a bunch of them right there, but like for the tag team titles, the Usos have been tag team champions for over a year. And the list goes on and on. That's probably at least 10 different instances in the last 5 years alone. That's a lot of different reigns that have been held by a lot of different people. AJ Styles was WWE champion for over a year. So I like long title reigns, but I feel like when we see too many of them, they're not as special anymore. I'm not saying I want to see 2-week title reigns or, a month-long title reign. Like, I feel like we got those a lot in WWE at a certain point, like 9 or 10 years ago. And I was like, all right, these titles mean nothing. And I'd rather have long title reigns compared to short title reigns. But I feel like you got to space them out, and not everyone has to be champion for a year. If the story makes sense, then great. And it did make sense for a lot of the people that I mentioned. But it's not as impressive as it once was because a lot of people hold titles for like a year now. So it's like, okay, how much does it really mean if everyone's doing it? You know what I mean? So, like, especially in the NWA, people have been champions for like a fucking year. I mean, Aldis was champion for 3 years. The NWA Women's Tag Team Champions were champions for almost a year. Camille's been champion for over a year. Tyrus now has been champion for almost a year. No one really gives a fuck with the NWA, I get it, but just as an example, if it happens too often, it's like, okay, how much does it really mean? And then it goes to tell you, all right, how deep is this division to where you don't want to put the championship on anyone else? You know what I mean? So I don't think every reign has to be 7 months long. That's why I thought Adam Page's reign was perfect. It was 6 months, but it served its purpose. It wasn't a year. It wasn't 3 months. It was right in that ballpark. Not everyone's gonna have even a 6-month reign, but I feel like it makes sense for people like that when the story makes sense and whatever. So like long title reigns, but do not need as many of them as we've gotten in the last number of years, I would say, and all these, across all the companies. And that's going to do it, guys, for episode 451 here today. The hashtag AskGSM for Wednesday, July 20th, 2022. Thank you guys, as always, for checking out the show. I appreciate it. If you want to send in a question, you can do so by tweeting me on the Twitter machine at WrestleRant with the hashtag AskGSM. Find me on Facebook as well, at facebook.com/Graham.GSM.Matthews. Drop a comment on the post that I usually put up on the wall itself, or on the, on the post itself. You can drop a comment there, if not on the wall itself. And last but certainly not least, drop your question down below in the comment section on this very video. I'll include your question in next week's edition. I don't select all the questions, I just want to let people know that. I get a lot of repeats, especially like in each individual episode. So if I see something repeated or I've already answered it like the last couple of weeks, I probably won't select your question. I've already gone an hour and 10 minutes already. That's just because I like to talk a lot. So if I don't select your question, do not be offended. Maybe try something else. Sometimes I just don't see it. But just try something else or send it another time and I might answer it. But anyway, guys, have a great rest of your week. As I mentioned earlier, if you haven't already, check out my interview with Bill Goldberg from Sunday here on the channel in video form. Really enjoyed that chat. And more interviews in the weeks to come as we head into SummerSlam next weekend, which I will be in attendance for and cannot wait for. Have a great one, guys. I'm Graham GSM Matthews, and I'll catch your ass down the road.